What the fuck happened to my water?
What you just saw was of course a representation of King Crimson's ability to skip time. Many JoJo fans find this ability very confusing, but I never found it that hard to understand, so I decided I want to share my interpretation of King Crimson and how it works. Here we have the video about me drinking water. Let's say it represents fate. I believe that King Crimson takes a point in time, like this, and cuts it like that. Now this part here is not connected to the flow of fate, but I believe everything in it is still pushed forwards in fate. And as a side effect of not being connected to fate, every living being here loses consciousness and awareness. I'll explain both concepts now, because I believe they are connected. So, moving forward in fate, even after being separated from fate, is really the same concept as throwing a ball. When this guy here throws a ball, the ball will continue moving forward even after leaving his hand. But after leaving his hand, there is nothing pushing it forward. So it moves forward only because of momentum. And I think the same concept applies to King Crimson and fate. When everything is separated from fate, it continues moving in the direction fate threw it. Now, if a living being was conscious during this, they could choose their own fate and go a different direction than the way they were thrown. But they aren't conscious, so they become mindless slaves to the fate momentum. Now, why do they become unconscious? Well, if fate exists, then free thought and free will does not. So, to get a new idea in a world where fate exists, fate has to give you the idea. But if you are separated from fate, then you have nothing that can give you the idea, and therefore you can't think, and you can't sense, you can't react, and therefore no living being can control their fate after being separated from fate. Think of it like this. Imagine the previously mentioned ball was supposed to bounce off a wall, but right before the ball hits the wall disappears. So there's no wall that will make it bounce. And when separated from fate, there's also no force that will give people ideas. Now you may wonder why Diavolo isn't affected by that, and I have a theory about that too. I believe that when King Crimson cuts time away from fate, Diavolo also gets his own timeline with a new fate, like here. This new fate is controlled entirely by his subconscious and his decisions. So he is still aware of what is happening. And I believe this timeline that Diavolo gets put into works like a bubble. Outside the bubble is the main timeline. Inside the bubble is only Diavolo and whatever he has on him. So the only things he can really do is everything he could already do with his own body. So he could, for example, punch himself or pick his nose. but those things aren't really advantageous in combat. So the only real useful application of this new fate he controls is to move to locations he wasn't supposed to be in. For example, if he was fated to be stabbed, he can move away from the knife and avoid that fate. But since he is in his own timeline, he can't interact with the world around him. But for example, if he wanted my water here, he couldn't take my water because that water isn't in his timeline. It isn't in his universe, basically. Of course, this can't go on forever. So I believe that after a certain amount of time, Diavolo is put back in the original timeline. And a second cut happens. And then what happens after a second cut is stitched back together at the point of the first cut. So it's as if this never happened. But the consequences of it still happen, because the second cut happened after this. Think of it like this. I can delete this clip here, but this clip here that happened after that clip still exists. And I think that's what happens with time when Diavolo skips time in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure 2. So I think everything returns to normal. The original fate takes control again, but it will have to adapt and change because Diavolo has moved. So even if he escaped his fate temporarily, he didn't do it permanently. And yeah, that's how I think King Crimson works. Hope that helps.